Don Levers, and this is Midday with Reverend Don. Welcome. Always lovely to spend my midday with you. And if you would like to um, ask anything or say anything or simply interact and say hello, if you do so on the pages that we're broadcasting on, it will show up in my chat room, and you can ask questions, you can help direct the conversation, whatever you would like to do. Yesterday we were talking about clairvoyance, and I suspect we'll probably talk about some more psychic things today. But I'm going to start in a totally different place. And that is this morning, I was filming with Cosmo Rubiconis for the upcoming reboot of Reverend Don's Library of Horror. And the new episode will be coming to you relatively soon. And hello, Renee, in the chat room. Good to see you. The first film we'll be doing will be Metropolis from the 1920s. Hello, Reverend Mike, in the chat room. So we spent this morning filming, and it's kind of interesting. Hello, Matthew. To be filming Reverend Don's Library of Horror when I'm about to disassemble my library, but that's how it goes. Hello to Mary. Good to see you. And it'll be interesting parting with this library, parts that I've carried my whole life. But the time has come to dismantle it. And if you're interested in any of the books, they'll be coming up available soon. Hello to Anna. Hello to Julia Ortego Castellano in the chat room. Good to see you. The next phase of my life is going to be very different from past phases. And, it's kind of bittersweet, but I'm also looking forward to it. I carried so many things all these years out of a sense of duty that I can lay down now. And I think that's going to make the last phase of my life a very different one and perhaps more enjoyable. I'll actually be able to do more for myself for a change. We'll see how that works out, but I'm hopeful it's going to work out well. And you, of course, will be with me on that journey because I intend to continue broadcasting every day and doing programs like Reverend Don's Library of Horror, appearing monthly on Tarot Thursday, and many other things. So I think that if anything, my filming is going to be more prominent than previously. And I look forward to that. Hello to John in the chat room. John asks if this is a new podcast. Relatively new. I've been doing it for, a few weeks now. So in and of itself, yes, it's new. I did do Reverend Don's vlog for over a decade. This is different from that, however. And we'll be doing it for a while. And I want to say hello to Janet Gann, who I have not yet seen in the chat room, but today is her birthday. Happy birthday, Janet. And of course, that might mean she doesn't come today because I'm sure she has other things to do on her birthday, but we want to wish her happy birthday anyway. There are a lot of things I could talk about at Metropolis, and Eddie Jr. says that's a good movie to highlight. 1927 Metropolis Fritz Lang, 2.5 hours. Now, of course, we're going to be using the public domain version of the film, so it's a bit shorter. It's the shorter release version of the time. But we also have an awful lot of interesting facts about that film to share. And it's a wonderful, fascinating film. It's truly a cultural landmark. But you also have to remember, and hello to Deb in the chat room. So good to see you. One of my many co-authors. Deb has been an invaluable help on many occasions. Lovely person. Metropolis is, of course, a silent film from that silent era. So you have to understand that when you watch it. But if you can take it for what it is, it's classic and timeless. But the silent style was somewhat more pronounced than modern acting style, so that is an issue. I never find it a problem, but then I grew up with these things. but the story is fascinating, the artistic realization is magnificent, and the themes are timeless. So I think people will enjoy that. We have not chosen the next film just yet, but we'll be obviously putting it together soon. And Reverend Don's Library of Horror will be a monthly occurrence. Um, and I don't know, is there anything more I should say about that? Film is one of my passions. My collection of film books is probably one of the things I will be holding on to from the library. Um, Being a visual artist, I've always been fascinated with film, and I can remember writing little screenplays before I actually knew how to write. My mother would help me. And they included camera angles and things like that because apparently I understood them. I remember it's only now looking back that I realize how odd that was. Um, but we had the camera angles and everything. She must have assisted me in understanding that. Eddie Jr. mentions that they like the way that Moloch is presented in Metropolis. I agree with that, and we actually will be talking a little bit about that. I think the story of the Tower of Babel, as presented in Metropolis, is very interesting and different, certainly, from how most people have historically interpreted it. And Eddie asks, is it Moloch or Molech? And I'm sure people have probably used both. Moloch is what I'm most familiar with. But that brings us back to our conversation of a few days ago that there are many pronunciations for these things, often many spellings, particularly when it's a word that was not spelled with the Latin alphabet in the first place and had to be transliterated. Anything that's transliterated is likely to have multiple transliterations unless it has a long established history. So these are some of the things on my mind at this time. And I was going to go ahead and talk a little bit more about psychic work. We were talking about clairvoyance, particularly the other day. We were talking about oracle work. And I think that I had been talking about how um, oracles are used in a number of religious traditions in a ritual context. And this does make them a somewhat different thing than just straight clairvoyant work. Even though it's the same process, it's really the same thing, but it describes a variation on it. Another variation is the seance. Um, And of course, you say the word seance, it's like the word Ouija board. People have preconceived ideas that don't necessarily relate to the reality of the thing when properly experienced. People think of seances as being spooky experiences in darkened rooms with very flamboyant happenings, and that is not really the case. The term seance means sitting, it means to sit for messages from spirits. Um, Lady Crystal and I did this weekly, sometimes daily, for years, and we just described it as sitting. Um, and you sit and you receive the message. How deep a trance you're in depends on you and what you're choosing to do. It can be so deep that you're in a full mediumistic trance. It can be quite a light trance, and is still a séance. If you're in a full mediumistic trance, your consciousness um, is effectively to one side, sometimes totally absent. You're unlikely to remember anything that comes through. If you're in a low trance, your consciousness is still very much there, but you're still unlikely to remember the messages because that's not how this process works. And as we were saying yesterday, they come through, they don't stay. They come in through the crown chakra, and they clothe themselves with concepts and words from your mind because the original message is telepathic in character. And then when you've brought it through, it's gone as a general rule. So it must be written down if you want to hold on to it or filmed. Although an interesting thing is that electronic equipment does not always work in this context. I used to work with a woman that I was teaching this art to, and we would record our sessions using an old-fashioned tape recorder because I am that old. And after a while, it just stopped working. So she bought a new tape recorder. It worked for maybe a session, stopped working, and then we realized they weren't going to work. We had to stop taping because the energy was damaging the machine. It was stopping it from working. I'd encountered that before, but in more limited ways. Years after that, Lady Crystal was doing a seance in Hoopston, and a news crew came out to cover it. And they were able to get the film they wanted, but then she sat down to do a reading for the reporter. And they had checked the camera battery before they sat down. It was full. But as this reading progressed, the camera shut down because the battery was empty. The reading had taken all that energy. And they talked about that in the news report, making it one of the most interesting I am aware of about psychic work. Also won an award for the reporter, who was then promoted to a national um, platform from the local one they'd been working from. But you cannot necessarily rely on electronics to capture this effect because it will interfere with the energy. The psychic energy will interfere with the electronic energy. If you're going to do oracle work, medium work, clairvoyant work, you should use energetic batteries. I commonly will put a column of light at the four corners of the room, for example, just as we do in ritual, or I might make a ball of light to act as a battery. This will make it much easier to do the work because these will generate energy, and you can draw upon that as you go. You can also call into yourself the energies of the universe. You don't want to use only your own because it can use a lot. I've often talked about how important grounding is. And I want to say hello to the Libracast, who says, bonjour. Bonjour to you, Libracast. Welcome. It's good to have you. We're talking today about psychic work. And also, if people have questions or comments, they can guide this conversation anywhere they want it to go. Grounding is very important in psychic work, but knowing how to pull additional energies in, knowing how to generate additional energies is also very important, because particularly deeper trance work takes a lot of energy. I think you should never do it without creating energetic batteries, except possibly when you're first learning, when it will be perhaps not as intense an experience, but as you learn, you must do this. I used to do a meditation group in the suburbs of Chicago that would commonly go between 4 and 6 hours at a session, during which I was constantly doing channeling, medium work, oracle work, whatever you want to call it. And I absolutely made sure I had energetic batteries to help me to have additional energy to do that. I also drank a lot of coffee and ate a lot of chocolate during that. And that's, I think, part of why I was able to do such long sessions. I don't think I could have done it without the energetic batteries. I could be wrong. I will say it's like a muscle. The more you use it, the better you are. And using it every week that way, using it over a long period, it's going to strengthen, and you will be able to do more than you begin. And the Libracast invites me to come to their podcast. I would love to, and perhaps we can have you on here. Let us. My email is donlewishp@aol.com. Has been that since the early 1990s. Feel free to contact me, and we'll set something up. There's so many interesting things about psychic work. But psychic work and magical work are the same thing. I talk about this in the degree lessons. Magic work and psychic work are not really separate, but magic is active and psychic is passive, but they're all using the higher powers of the soul. And in many ways, they're very much the same powers. It's just the way they're being used. And this is, I think, a very important thing to understand, especially about magic, because magic historically has so often been understood in ways that are very different from what I consider its reality. As far as I'm concerned, magic is simply accessing the higher powers of your soul in the same way that psychic work is accessing the higher powers of your soul. And I think that with both magic and psychic work, everyone is doing it in every moment they're alive without knowing it. But the problem that people have, particularly with unconscious magic work, say are also unconscious of their own blockages and their own crossed wires. But are they doing magic unconsciously? I would say absolutely. Um, and hello to Regina in the chat room, who remarks on dark chocolate as being helpful and good for you as well. And certainly that is true. There are a lot of things that you can do. Um, I mean, our short little broadcast here is not the moment for an exhaustive discussion of them, but certain foods are very good to help you to deal with that use of psychic energy. Energetic batteries are helpful, um, and there are many other things too. Some of those things include keeping your energy clean, remaining well shielded, which everyone really should do every day, well grounded. Hello to Brenda in the chat room. Good to see you. Um, these things are all very important, and so many people who teach psychic arts don't teach them. Um, and Eddie Jr. in the chat room says that they believe it's very important for anyone doing magic work to come up with their own personal definition of what magic is. And that I would certainly say that they must have their own understanding. Yes. Um, and truly, it is your own understanding. There's a poem by Kipling that includes the phrase, "The race is won by one and one, never by two and two." And this is describing life. And, it really is true. Our understanding and interaction with this universe is internal to us. That's not saying anything bad about anyone else. It's not minimizing the importance of relationships. But in the end, we are a contained unit. We must have our own understandings if we wish to have understandings. It's been said the unexamined life is not worth living. And although I don't know that I'd go that far, I largely do agree with that. I think that we must have our own understanding of the world that we live in, our relationship to it, and who we are. We talk a lot about shadow work, and that's what that is. A lot of it is understanding yourself and your relationship to the universe. And the part that makes it shadow work is that as part of this understanding, you find and correct the ways in which you trip yourself up, your internal crossed wires. When we talk about the shadow is basically the part of yourself you don't see. Some people would define it as a negative part of yourself. That isn't actually what I would define it as, certainly. It's rather the unseen part. It's where the crossed wires are. It's where belief systems you're not conscious of having reside. I often talk about, in terms of magic, how the classic example is the person who wants a great new job, but in their heart they don't believe they can get it. So the magic's not going to work. They have to do the shadow work to change what's in their heart to make the magic work. Because if you don't believe you can have it, you're right. Relationships are this way. I often tell the story, I guess I'll tell it one more time, of how many years ago, probably 35 years ago now, um, I was attempting to start a relationship with someone I was very attached to. And in fact, we did have a good relationship, but it was never a romantic one. But I was wanting it to become one. But I was also blocking this fiercely. But I did not realize. One day, I had a lunch appointment with this person, and they came to my house and knocked on the door, and I never heard. I couldn't figure out why they hadn't come. And then I talked to them and found out they did. So I went to Lady Crystal, my teacher, and asked her, what gives here? And she pointed out to me that I had to be blocking this. People do this all the time. They think they want it, part of them really doesn't, and they block it. And she told me what to do with that, which is to examine my feelings and to uh, to transform those that were not serving their purpose. And we have instructions for how to do this in the degree lessons. And John in the chat room asks, is the shadow an archetype of the personal unconscious or the collective unconscious? And I would say ultimately both, personally. But when you do shadow work, you will first encounter it in a very personal sense. What I found is the more shadow work you do, the more universal the issues become. Because in the end, as the famous maxim goes, as above, so below, in the end, there's one spirit running through everything. And at a certain point, the issues are universal. We may not think they're applying to us, but as we dig, we find they do. Um, but not everyone will do shadow work to that extent. Um, but I found for myself and for others I've worked with that once we'd gotten through all the idiosyncratic shadow, we found very general things that seemed to apply to many people, but they were there, and we needed to work on healing them. And of course, shadow work never stops. I still do shadow work today. I'll be doing it as long as I'm in this incarnation. It's something you really need to continually do because as long as you live, you're adding to that shadow. Um, Hopefully less than previously, but it's a natural part of life. I think the biggest misunderstanding people have about metaphysics of any stripe is that it's not a natural part of life. It's not a gift that only some people have, although only some people develop it highly. But as I was saying earlier, everyone does psychic things constantly, unconsciously. Everyone does magic unconsciously. Everyone certainly has a shadow. Um, it's part of our natural life. And the things that we speak about when we study metaphysics are not only relevant if we're studying metaphysics. Even if we walk away from metaphysics for some reason, things like grounding and cleansing would still be just as important as they ever were. So Regina asks, what about the inner critique? When doing magic and psychic work, is it really part of the self or demons? Thank you. Um, Demons are an interesting subject because what people mean by that word can be so different. But if you ask me, yes, it is part of the self, and it often um, can also be affected by the shadow. Self-doubt. We were talking yesterday about how you can warp your message. That's also true for your own inner voice. Um, Fear can do that. Self-doubt can do that. You have to learn to listen, not try to control it. And when you listen to it, it will tell you what you need to know correctly. But if you if your issues are so strong you can't actually listen to it, then you should seek other forms of guidance as well. Um, Particularly if it's an issue that you're very emotionally involved in, those emotions can warp your messages. This is why some people will say that you should never read tarot for yourself. And if you're just beginning, I think they're right about that. When you're learning tarot, reading for yourself can be problematic because when you do a reading, you must have distance from the subject. If you know too much about the subject, if you're too invested in the subject, you will warp your results. And of course, you are invested in yourself. So if before you've learned how to have that distance, you're reading for yourself, you have to take it with a big grain of salt. As I was saying yesterday, over time, you will gain the ability to read for yourself impartially. But I think it does take some practice. So with tarot and other forms of divination, I do intend or incline to advise people to begin by reading for others and then read for themselves. Um, Although, as I was saying yesterday, when we were talking about straight clairvoyance, I do start having people read for themselves from the start and just say, take your time, begin by taking it with a grain of salt and watch the track record. It will show you soon enough that you're doing it well. It will help you to do it better. It itself will guide you. And it's the higher self. And hello to Michael in the chat room. Thank you for being here. And I quite enjoy talking to people in the chat room. This is really so lovely. Um, I had not been doing daily broadcasts for a while, and I have to say I'm really quite enjoying it. Of course, now when I say daily, there are days I'm going to miss because life. Um, it's like last Thursday, I was not able to do a broadcast, but normally I will be here. Um, and LibraCast asks about the psychological aspects of shadow work. And I don't know that I make a distinction between these things, because I'd have to say at a certain level it's all psychological. Um, I'm not. I would need a more concrete explanation of what you mean, but I think that it's all self-knowledge. It's all self-healing. So I guess it depends on how you're defining that. If we're talking about clinical psychology, that's a more specific thing. But I'd have to say that all of this has its psychological aspect, and that's important. So we have come to the end of our half hour, and in a moment we will close with a prayer, as we are in the habit of doing, and we'll be back tomorrow, and probably we'll be continuing this subject. Um, and and Eddie Jr. remarks that healing the shadow involves balance. Absolutely, it should lead you to balance. So we'll continue tomorrow, and I hope that you've enjoyed the program and that you'll join us again. And now for our prayer. Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we ask you to help us to be open to the guidance we need in our lives, to help us to understand ourselves and our motivations and our desires so that we may move forward clearly and working from our higher selves. Beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, we pray that we will go forward with you hand in hand as we go forward. And we thank you with love and with respect. And until next time, may you blessed be. And thank you for joining me. And until next time, may you blessed be.